Greetings, adventurer. Welcome to the Ocean County Library's 8th episode of Forge Your Imagination, a guide to immersive world-building podcast, a series that will point creative individuals in the right direction when attempting to create your own world. I'm your host, Tom, a world-building enthusiast and professional dungeon master with over 13 years of experience. In today's episode, I will be discussing how to create organic general world lore that will elevate your masterpiece. Now, without further ado, let's get this quest on a roll. This portion will help cover the general world lore of major and minor cities, as well as nations, which will include their holidays, special events, sports, languages, and prominent figures. Using these broad details will allow us to build a sense of connection and commerce within your world. I know I've spoken a little bit about these topics before, so feel free to use that as a base and this as the building blocks. Alright, adventurers, let's start by breaking down what we have heard in the previous episodes. If you have taken my advice, you would most likely have created something for the following topics. You have determined your genre and timeline, created a map, and have gone in depth on climate creation. Using your environment, you built upon these ancient lands and created your classifications of people and their personal beliefs and cultures. After establishing that, you launched into building the rules and regulations set by their administrations. With all of this planned, you should have quite the in-depth world on your hands so far. If this is your world-building knowledge and it was just a rough sketch, getting this far is quite the accomplishment. But we are those who seek exquisite world lore, so naturally we push onwards towards more extensive details. To start, let's look over some holidays and natural events that don't correlate to any one specific classification of people. These are holidays that will be accepted and celebrated around the globe, not just in one specific nation or one specific group of people like we have previously discussed. I think most holidays are celebrated as cheerful events, or holidays that honor important memories of the past and those who have fallen. For example, in my universe of Solera, I create an event called Festival of the Fallen Stars. This is a holiday where seers gather around to do divination rituals and see into the future. These rituals are glimpses of what the year will hold by looking at the stars and using astrology. This usually is celebrated as a large masquerade ballroom dance. This way, if someone is given a great or poor fortune, the rest of the crowd won't know the name of the person who got such a fortune. This allows the mages to preserve their freedom and individuality. This event is usually held on August 25th. Although I think cheerful holidays are vital, I would also encourage you to use the opposite, which could be important depending on how dark you want your world to feel. For example, I have an event in my world that falls on the solar eclipse. This solar eclipse will trigger all magical creatures to enter this state of frenzy. That is why every solar eclipse is carefully monitored, and even the friendly familiars must be locked away securely. During this time, all missions are postponed, and specialized shepherds are used to redirect creatures of darkness away from mortals. This is because, in my universe, shepherds are those who have special affinity for things that go bump in the night. They can connect with magical creatures that others run from, like banshees, boogeymen, and wendigos. For this reason, they are hired to round up and herd these creatures away from larger civilizations where they could put people at risk. You could also implement holidays that exist in real life and just make slight changes to them, or add special details to enhance the event. In my universe of Solera, I use the holiday Day of the Dead. This holiday involves family and friends gathering to pay respects and remember friends and family members who have died. However, since my universe is full of magic and wonder, this day is celebrated in special ways, by hiring mediums to help loved ones connect with the dead. In my universe specifically, this celebration is run by the Morrigan family, because they have innate special abilities that help them see and speak to the dead. Then we move on to special events that are celebrated just as enthusiastically as holidays, but aren't done on an annual basis. A good example of this would be one of the events I created called the Ceremony of the Rising Sun. This is a rare ceremony that is celebrated when a white magic color mage is discovered. This is incredibly rare because to be born with white magic is a 1 in 100,000 chance. So, when a person does manifest white magic, the event is represented as the birth of a new noble who is considered to be part of the royal family. Regardless of their status or birthright, the individual is given a royal title, house, and fief of land. Next, we'll move on to sports. You could always use existing sports in real life, or you could make your own sports. In my magical universe of Solera, I created a sport based on boat racing. This sport is conducted by sailing 2 large sailboats through mermaid and kelpie-infested waters. This is a challenge because the aquatic creatures will do everything in their power to try to stop you. This is why you could use your own familiars and spells to either move and protect your boat, or you could damage the other rival team's ship to make them sink first. Because the first boat that crosses the finish line, or the last boat standing, is the one that wins the match. Another fun sport idea in the magical universe that I thought of was using track and field and merging it with magical elements. So the goal is to get from one side of the building to the other. However, the use of familiars and items is banned to make sure that there's no unfair advantages. What's cool is that magic spells, however, can be used. For example, individuals could use force magic to create additional jump pads, fire magic to blast themselves forward, earth magic to make stepping stones, enhancement magic for speed boosts, and transmodification magic to transform into an animal, like a bird, monkey, or something else to speed up or outmaneuver your rival. Use the Forge adventure to expand your senses and hear all about the fandom-friendly events that the Ocean County Library has to offer. The Ocean County Library hosts its annual Fan Nation event on October 4th this year of 2025. This event has a bunch of fun programs, panels, crafts, and their very own cosplay contests at the Toms River Library. Please consider dropping in and sharing the fun with your family or friends. If you want a taste of the fun before the main event, feel free to listen to our various fandom podcast episodes called Fandom Fridays that cover Dungeons & Dragons, K-pop, and vampires starting the first week of September and releasing one episode a week leading up to the event. You are also more than welcome to check out some of the previous year's broadcast episodes that discuss fan favorite fandoms, like Percy Jackson, the anime One Piece, and much, much more. If this is something you're interested in adventure, please keep an eye out. Information on future Fan Nation events can be found on our website, theoceancountylibrary.org, under Calendar of Events. Now, adventurers, grab your anvil and hammer because it's time to return to forging your imagination. We are going to continue the world building by creating prominent figures. I personally love stories when the author adds lore of popular individuals that aren't crucial to the story. However, even though these little details aren't relevant to the story, they breathe life into your world. For example, I love the idea of using Harry Houdini's name in my magical world lore. I thought of this narrative that Houdini was a letdown in the magical community. He was a terrible mage and an even worse student. He would terrorize his teachers with unorthodox pranks and get in a lot of trouble. However, due to this creativity and unorthodox skills, he became the best escape artist in the realm of mortals with his death-defying stunts. Another interesting idea that I had to use was if we used Leonardo da Vinci, the famous painter. However, what many people didn't know is that when he received the praise saying he brought his art to life was correct. Da Vinci was a sculptor, a person with the innate ability to manipulate materials and breathe life into them. Now, Remember, in your universe, you are allowed to bend history a little bit. So let's do that here. Let's say he created masterful works, but none that can match his statue of Alexandria. This is a statue of his lover, who had fallen sick and passed away when they were young adults. This mystical creation can walk, run, talk, make facial expressions, but it seems to be unable to smile or laugh. Most scholars think it's because of her developing depression issues over the loss of Leonardo da Vinci himself. He named this work of art What Should Have Been. And as for the location, I would say it's best to probably put it in a school academy garden or maybe a museum. As a dungeon master, I personally like to include various prominent people like this because it not only enriches the world lore, but also leaves something for the players to use and build upon. For example, now if my players were to visit that garden at the School of Solera, they would be able to find Andrexia and talk to her. Maybe they could even relieve some of her depression and help her find a new direction to take in this lifetime. Please keep in mind, when it comes to using the names of people who exist in our real world, you have to be careful. There are several legal and ethical considerations to keep in mind. After all, you do not want to write anything that can be copyrighted or seen as defamation. I personally like to play it safe and only include people who have been deceased for over 100 years. After creating prominent figures in the history of your world, I would then delve into how you want to handle languages. What I mean by this is that you could either use one language that all people use, which is described as a common language, or you could create your own hypothetical language based on each group of people. For example, an orc in Lord of the Rings would speak Orcish. This isn't a real language because it hasn't been built upon or fully developed. However, there are instances where actual functional languages can be created in works of fiction. This is usually done when a fictional language is developed using actual vocabulary, grammar, and syntax. A great example of this would be the language Klingon in the Star Trek universe. In many types of languages, especially fantasy worlds, they tend to use the names of classification of groups as the main contributor to their language's name. Like I mentioned before, in Lord of the Rings, Dungeons & Dragons, and many other fantasy novels, Orcish is the native language of the orcs. The same could be said about Elvish, which is the language of the elves, and Dwarvish, the language of the dwarves. Using this logic, the language a werewolf might have is werewolfish, although I personally don't think that rolls off the tongue well. So in cases like this, we can either take a single part of the name and make it wolfish, or use the scientific name for a wolf, which is Canis lupus. Alternatively, we could use only part of that scientific name and make the language they speak known as Canis or canine. However, you could also just throw all that logic to the wolves quite literally and make your own name for the language in question. After all, you're the master of your own world. Next up, let's discuss a few common mistakes that writers and world builders end up making. One mistake is that, this is really the biggest mistake and most common too. It's using too much world building details. What I mean by this is if you focus too much on environment building and in-depth descriptions, you tend to lose sight of the story you plan on telling. The same goes for if you give too in-depth explanations on a culture or group that has no importance to the plot. It's interesting to create a whole functional language in your world, but if it's a language no one speaks and has no relevance to the story, then there's really no reason for you to build upon it. The second most common mistake would be homogeneity. Can you imagine if no one in a group or organization has a divergent opinion, appearance, or lifestyle? Like everyone agrees. There is no outcast or a skeptic or someone in conflict with where they belong. Have you ever encountered a culture like that? That would be completely unrealistic and break the flow of what we consider possible. But that's all I have. Tune back in with us next month when we continue our quest for in-depth world building by building our very own currency.
If you are hearing this message, you've officially listened to the entire episode, and for that, I'd like to thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please take a look over some of our other OCL Soundwaves podcasts. Feel free to leave us a rating on Spotify, Radio Public, and Pocket Casts. Most importantly, safe travels, adventurers.